Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, I believe, still for this session on agentic development. I'm super excited to be here, and I will have a guest joining me shortly as we talk about what's been happening in the agent space. This session today is less about all of the technology that Google is building, but more just about how we're thinking about agents and what's happened over the past year. What are we thinking in terms of the future? What's coming in the next 6 months? So my name is Yasmeen Ahmad. I look after Data Cloud here at Google, all of our amazing technologies from the analytical, operational, governance, streaming, business intelligence technologies. So let's jump straight in. As we think about how the data industry has built over the last decade, we've really built for two consumers, the human and the applications that they use. Interestingly, humans are actually not very good at speaking data. So over multiple decades, we've built dashboards, UIs, interfaces, buttons, essentially to meet humans where they are, actually slowing down technology to meet human speed. Because humans take seconds to click, they take minutes to read a chart, and actually humans will often take days to even take a decision based on data. So if you had a complex query and it took 45 seconds to run, it was fine. The human went and grabbed a coffee. And then we built the applications that humans use. Those applications built on rigid APIs. In fact, being in the product engineering team, one of the challenges is once you build those APIs, they become tech debt. Anytime you change an API, those applications break. So as product engineering teams, we have to be super careful about how we even build these platforms, because as soon as applications are built, those applications are rigid. They are connected into those APIs, and they can't be changed. So over the past decade, we've built for two consumers who are very deterministic. But that's changing today. Architectures are collapsing because the user that we are architecting around no longer has a pulse. Agents are the future. In fact, when we sit down in our product engineering strategy sessions and we look at how are we going to build the next generation of data platform and now the agentic data cloud, we actually put agent as the central persona. Gone are the data engineers, the data scientists, the business users. Those personas will still be important, but the interaction layer is now owned by the agent. And agents don't behave like humans. In fact, just look at web traffic today. If you take some of the stats that have come out recently from the API gateways, the web is seeing massive, violent spikes. And it's not because humans have learned how to click faster, use a mouse faster, or press buttons more quickly. It's because we now have agents hitting the web. And an agent doesn't just click once. If you think about an agent reasoning loop, agents will loop, they will query, they will test, and in the time that a human took to do one click, an agent might actually hit that API 10 to 20 times. So those 10 to 20 time increased volumes are actually driving 100x more compute as agents come online. We're no longer dealing with retrieval systems, the old SQL world. We are now dealing with reasoning, because agents don't query, they reason. So as we look at agents are now driving everything. Agents are driving data platforms. Agents are actually operating over those applications that we've had in the past. In fact, one of the common questions that I've often had from customers is, are we going to replace our SaaS applications now with just agentic workflows? Well, the reality is actually more nuanced. It's not that the applications are completely disappearing and being replaced, but certainly the application layer, the interface layer, is being demoted. Agents are bypassing those interface layers, going direct to the APIs and driving workflows across multiple systems. We're moving from a world of SaaS to actually agents as a service. A perfect example of this is one of my customers, Manhattan Associates. Manhattan Associates run supply chains for the largest retailers in the world. And they were running on legacy databases, back to that rigid, slow world. What Manhattan Associates did is they reimagined as they moved to Google Cloud, and they built their Manhattan Agent Foundry. They now have an army of specialized agents. So for example, the shipping tracking agent, it will actually in real time monitor weather and traffic patterns and automatically, autonomously rebook freight. Their wave coordinator agent will pick up missing inventory and reroute in real time forklift drivers and various vehicle operators. These agents don't require a UI. There's not a human sitting coordinating that rerouting. It's now agents that aren't just summarizing, they're actually acting, they're doing. So as we think about this future with agents as the users, running that agentic enterprise, trying to run a fleet of agents on a data stack that was built for humans just doesn't work. It breaks. So we're at Google, we're really rethinking how we invert the IT stack, and we're inverting it across 3 layers. So let's start with the reasoning engine. To build an engine that's capable of thought and reasoning, not just retrieval, you can't build on a set of fragmented tools. You actually need the interface, the data, and the compute to work seamlessly together. So it all starts with that interface. You know, if I think just before the whole GenAI momentum kicked off 3 years, the industry was moving up the stack. In fact, all the technical pieces were being left in the background. Our focus was on prettier UIs. Can we have nicer looking applications? How do we build something that a user likes to interact with? Well, you might have noticed recently that CLIs are sexy again. Suddenly, the code is very interesting again. Why? Because agents speak code. Actually, agents aren't necessarily interested in those UIs and buttons. They're bypassing those buttons. So in reality, when a human was missing a software tool, they would raise an IT ticket, and 2 weeks later, an IT person would have dealt with it. An agent can actually drop into a sandbox, write some Python, test it, execute it, and then delete the code. Similarly, when an agent hits a broken API, it can write a patch, it can execute a new workflow, it can work around that API. So we're moving from a world where it's actually less focused on those UIs and more focused on those agentic terminals, on those agentic interfaces, the tools, the skills, so that agents can drop in and interact with these systems. Beneath that interface is the SQL engine. If I think about even at Google building the data cloud, over the last decade, we obsessed over building the most optimal SQL engine. How could we crank the most performance efficiency out of our SQL engines? Well, actually, the SQL engine is being replaced. Well, I'll caveat that with, I think the SQL engine will remain, but actually, agents don't necessarily do the best with SQL. They don't do deterministic questions. They operate on intent. Intent requires our engine to have more than just SQL. Intent means an agent needs to have vector embedding search capabilities, to have graph capabilities, to have relational, to have unstructured data processing capability. This example I have here is of a customer we worked with, Make My Trip. They're India's biggest online travel agency. And they wanted to build this super interactive, voice-activated experience so their consumers could create a customized itinerary that was multimodal. However, when we started working with Make My Trip, they had MongoDB for unstructured data. They had Quadrant for vector embeddings. They were using Elasticsearch. They had a fragmented tool stack. You can't build a highly interactive experience on a fragmented tool stack. And so this is what took us on this journey of bringing all of these capabilities that agents now need into one engine where there's 0 hops. So for Make My Trip, they leveraged Spanner with all of the graph, the vector embedding, the AI inferencing, and the traditional relational SQL capabilities to build this new experience, reducing operational complexity by 75%. Okay, but speed and having that engine and that interface requires some amazing silicon, because agents think in invisible tokens. If you think about how an agent operates, an agent will build an invisible decision tree, it's verifying logic, it might actually now try multiple paths and disambiguate. One command can lead to 10,000 thinking tokens. So if chips continue to be designed for human speed, they're actually too slow for these multi-step reasoning loops. So this is why at Google we also believe it's not just the interface layer that has to change or the data layer, it's also the infrastructure. This is where our AI hypercomputer comes in. The innovations that you just heard on the main keynote, separating inferencing from training, compressing memory sizes. So as an agent's reasoning loop works through the interface layer, through the data layer to the infrastructure, we get the fastest speed and we remove those traffic jams. Okay, so we have a new interface, we've got a single engine, and we have our amazing compute. This is moving us away from a data cloud built for storage efficiency to really the future where we need agentic data clouds that are built for reasoning efficiency. Entirely different mindset. So let's look at the next layer now. So what do you do with all of that speed? How do you drive an outcome? This brings me to orchestration. You know, the last decade, we built IT on this idea of instruction. You wrote imperative code. It was task-based, click by click. However, that era of instruction is over. As we look at the agentic world today, we now hear about intent-driven engineering. Define the outcome and let AI figure out the path. And in fact, it's not just one AI. Today, my leading customers are talking about swarms of agents that are activated to complete that outcome. Here's an example, and this is actually a real one that we ran. So real-world scenario, the Strait of Hormuz is closed. It's actually compounded by a second dual blockade closure in the Red Sea, forcing global shipping chains to suspend transit and reroute via the Cape of Good Hope, adding 14 days to transit. Now, traditionally, if we think about the human world and how we've solved this problem, if you were in a company impacted by this global event, a 72-hour human sprint would start. A war room would be assembled, analysts would pull CSV files, build spreadsheets, and 3 days later, a leader would walk into a room with a slide deck to present a strategy. By that time, the data is stale, the cargo space is already gone, and the business is already impacted by millions. In this new world, if we now look at the capabilities of things like our deep research agents, we're able to take that intent and drive it to action immediately. So the intent can be as simple as preserve margins on impacted cargo. In the first millisecond, the deep research agent detects a news trigger. In the next 500 milliseconds, we have an agent that is querying BigQuery to find the exact shelf life of perishable goods. 1 second later, we're fetching live pricing data, checking air freight, and checking whether it's compliant with ESG. 3 seconds later, the swarm outputs a mitigation strategy. So that 72-hour human sprint is now done in under 3 seconds. But how does that work? How do we get a swarm to activate around events like this? Well, the reality is it's no longer just about the model. The models are super powerful. Gemini is amazing. The models can do impeccable reasoning, thinking, but it takes more than a model. The model is the engine, but to turn that model into real outcomes, we need a harness. I equate this back to the world of the internet. When the internet was first invented, super powerful technology, but it was completely unusable. The internet became usable once we built the web browser, when humans could actually build a website, when we could interact with this amazingly powerful web technology. Well, the agentic harness is the same. The agentic harness creates that environment that makes these super powerful models easy to apply to real-world scenarios. So when I think about that harness for us has two things. It's first the identity. You're setting the guardrails around that model. You're defining its enterprise memory, what data it has access to, including real-time data, analytical data. You're dictating exactly the actions the agent can take. And the second layer is a capability layer. You're giving it the skills, the tools, the workflows, the ability to touch the real world and take action. The harness is what allows agents to orchestrate complex workflows and drive outcomes. I want to use another example here of a customer we worked with this agentic harness. This is the example of Infinite. They're a decentralized finance trading platform. If you know anything about decentralized finance, very complex. Now, when a human asks for a financial strategy, their agentic swarm wakes up. So first, a discovery agent maps global liquidity risks. A risk agent audits smart contracts for vulnerabilities in milliseconds. An execution agent drafts the routing path to minimize price slippages. And then a verification agent just watches the whole entire thing and is ready to kill the trade if the math changes at any point in time. This is a process that used to take them 20 minutes. So a human would be operating in multiple systems for 20 minutes to make a trade that had a massive amount of risk. And now it's compressed to a single instant action. Okay, so let's move to layer 3, the trust fabric. So how do you govern these massive swarms? This is the next question my customers ask me. Now that we have not just one agent, 10 agents, you take Virgin Voyager, they have 1,000 agents. We need to be able to govern these agents. And it's not just that these agents are taking action, they're taking action autonomously. So how do we ensure that these autonomous actions can be trusted? And this challenge is now compounded by what I call the 1 million agent problem. We'll be talking about this in our spotlight for Data Cloud tomorrow, but essentially as we calculate how agents are growing and how organizations are creating agents, we're quickly seeing that the average large enterprise is getting to 100,000 to 500,000 agents, quickly to 1 million agents. Think about trying to track 1 million agents, evaluating whether they're doing the right thing, monitoring what they're doing, governing, meeting regulatory requirements. In the old world, when we built software, we saw evaluation as a gate. If the software passed the unit tests, it's good to go and we're going to deploy it. In the agentic world, evaluation isn't a gate, it's a continuous discipline. I equate this back to the world of drug discovery, where I came from. In drug discovery, as we looked at new drugs and we tested them in the lab, that was not enough. You actually, in drug discovery, have to watch how a drug impacts a population. So you watch it even after it's launched for side effects that weren't prevalent in the initial lab tests. That continuous observability is what we are seeing now come into play in the agentic world, different to how we traditionally tested software. And you also need hard limits. We call it the 2 out of 3 rule. Can an agent read your sensitive data, execute code, and work autonomously? Probably not, and probably never. The danger is it could read your financials, write a script, and email it to a competitor. We wouldn't want that happening. So the system needs a block. It needs a guardian. And today, that guardian doesn't necessarily have to be a human. It can simply be another agent. In fact, Deutsche Telekom built this. They built a RAN guardian. So they now have an agent swarm that looks at their network traffic. It proposes real-time changes to 5G networks if, say, there's a concert going on. But before it's able to actually take action in the live grid, the guardian evaluates and ensures that autonomous action is safe. And this guardian works. They've managed to reduce the time from major network events from several hours down to a single minute. That's 95% improvement in resolution times with zero compromising on security. Okay. So we've seen that inversion in enterprise IT. I spoke about those architectures of the past. they simply don't meet the scale, the speed, and the action needs of the agents that we're working with today. So whereas in the past we worked with rigid software that was trained, which was built and humans were trained to operate on, today it's not humans that are operating that software. So the winners we see are not the companies that are buying lots of software licenses. It's looking at how do we compress those 72-hour sprints that were human-driven down to 3 seconds, translating instructions into orchestrating intent. This is where we see the reasoning engine, orchestration, and trust fabrics are critical. And this is what we're building at Google. We're building the exact same architecture to build, deploy, and govern the autonomous enterprise. So please do check out our Agentic Data Cloud Spotlight session tomorrow, where we'll be deep diving into all of the new innovations that we're announcing here at Next to meet this future. But for now, I would like to invite Farhan to the stage, who's going to join me for a fireside chat. Farhan. Perfect. Welcome, Farhan. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
So Farhan and I had an amazing chat as a pre-brief, so we have some pre-wired questions, but I'm sure this is going to be an interesting conversation, Farhan, because you're in the deep of building agents at Shopify. So maybe just for my first question, I'd love to just double-click on your personal experience. Mm-hmm. So in our chat earlier, you spoke about you were an initial skeptic. And then there was a moment that really turned it around when you said, wow, what can these agents do for me? So can you talk a little bit about that wow moment for you?
Yeah, so if you're like me, I mean, obviously there's been hype around, obviously the LLMs and AI, and you keep hearing in the news, and like for people, AI. And then in 25, I think in the middle, they said 2026 is going to be the year of agents. And I started just rolling my eyes. I'm like, what does that actually mean? Like, what are they going to do for you? And I didn't really feel that it connected with me in terms of like understanding what that next phase was. And personally, it wasn't actually till I started playing around with OpenClaw that it like really got me to think about what this means. And so for those of you, people use OpenClaw or heard of OpenClaw, right? And it's this idea that you have the same models that we've had over the last few years. Of course, the models are getting better all the time. But this agentic, we're calling it agentic harness now, this way to use the model that's much more proactive. And the interesting thing about OpenClaw or any sort of agentic system is its proactivity and this ability to keep moving while you just ask it something simple. So you're moving out of just asking a question to a chatbot, like, hey, what's a good restaurant in Toronto, that I can go to on Friday night, to this more idea of, hey, can you actually reserve a restaurant for me every Friday for me and my wife at 7 p.m.? It's a completely different thing that you can do. You can't ask that to a Gemini or ChatGPT, but you can ask it of your Claw. And the funny thing about when you ask it out of your Claw is, or any agentic system is, it doesn't actually have the tools to do that, but it will build them. So in my case, when I asked it that, it said, well, are all of these restaurants going to be an open table? And I said, no. It said, cool. Can you give me a Twilio API key? Because it built a voice server to call these restaurants to make the reservations. And when it was doing that, it did this thing where it built a voice server and then said, let me do a test call. And it called me. And when I tried to interrupt it, I couldn't interrupt it because it had built it kind of as half duplex. And so I just went into my Claw and said, did you build this half duplex? I need to be full duplex. It said, oh, sorry. It deleted the code, rewrote the code again, and then it was full duplex. Then it called me, and then I realized that I didn't like the voice, and it changed the voice. Like, it was this idea of it's very proactive, and it really got me thinking that this is a different modality, even though it's the same LLM, but it's a different harness on top.
Yeah, maybe just double-clicking on modalities, because I know we spoke about this. Chat was the first modality that AI came about, but many people fixate on chat, but you see the world as being these other modalities really coming to play, right?
Yeah, it really forced me to reevaluate what I thought the LLM was capable of. So if you look at, well, again, if it's OpenClaw, just one example, there's Hermes agents, there's all the, you've just demoed a bunch of things that are agentic as well. It just shows you that let's call it 10% of the things outside of the LLM can greatly change the infrastructure that was the LLM, right? You gave the example of the internet. All of that infrastructure existed, but it wasn't until the web that all of a sudden all of these capabilities were unleashed. And I think the same thing's happening with agentic AI, where you are now able to use these tools that are proactive. They have a soul MD file, they have an agents MD file, they have a heartbeat, which does things on a schedule. These allow your LLM to do much more than you thought possible because it's using that infrastructure, but it's like an application on top of it.
Yeah, super fascinating. So one of the pieces that I know I speak to many customers about is the technology is amazing and how fast it's iterating, but the people and culture side is as a leader of an organization, how are you looking at the people and culture and adopting? Do you see people adopting natively the new technology? Are you showcasing that internally?
Yeah, it's similar to when, and so I run engineering, and so when GitHub Copilot came out and these LLMs started becoming very good at code, it took a while for people to adopt because at the beginning it was just autocomplete. Like, let me complete this portion of code that I'm writing, to this notion of like, let me give you a problem and it just generates all the code, to this idea where there's these modalities like Gemini CLI or Claude Code, where you don't even look at the code. You give it a problem, it writes the code in the background and says, does this work? And then you kind of give it feedback. And it takes people, not everyone is as used to this type of change, especially software engineers. And so it took a little time for people to adjust to the new world of like, hey, I'm actually going to become a manager of these tools that can build code versus writing code myself. And the same thing's true of these agents. Because now you mentioned some workflows where people probably did a job where they're looking at like like threat assessment, and my job is to look and understand the details, to actually I'm now managing software that is going to do that for me. I'm still valuable. Mm-hmm. I'm removing the toil of the task by using AI, but now actually my role is just different because I can do many more things. And I would say a lot of the technology is out here, but it's not evenly distributed yet because companies need to go through a transformation to understand what's going to change. The other thing I will say is the danger is actually just taking what you have in the current process and just AI-ifying it or automating it, versus a lot of what we do at Shopify is we kind of look at it and say, do we need to do this anymore? Or if I could design it today, how would I design it? And a lot of times it's like delete the old thing and just build something new, and it's simpler and more elegant, designed for like the new world. And so we like to delete a lot.
I love that, delete a lot.
Yes.
So I think even at Google, as our engineering teams have adopted, initially it was an assistant on the side. So it was very much just supporting to write code that you were writing anyway. Right. Whereas I think this next transformation, as we're talking about what agents can now do with these swarms, is actually saying, does the workflow even have to exist as it did before?
Correct.
Should we delete what we were doing before because there's a better way to do it? Any specific examples, Farhan, of things that you've seen being deleted as you reimagine?
Yeah, so one of the things, like I used to actually have a person, so we obviously have an internal product roadmap, and we had customers who always say, what's coming out from Shopify in the next 6 months? And I actually had a person who would actually try to figure out what are the things that we can share with our customers, and they would build this thing called like the spreadsheet or whatever, like the product roadmap, and they would look at the internal road mapping, they'd be in some of the meetings, they'd part of like product and product marketing, they'd produce a roadmap for the customer, and every like day it would change because the product is moving, or we would remove some requirement, or we'd add some feature, and they would have to keep that up to date for a customer. Now what we have is literally, we have a project management system, and at any point, anyone in the company could say, hey, can you generate me a roadmap based on this customer, so a specific profile, maybe they're interested in a certain domain, and it can generate like almost like a bespoke roadmap today based on what's happening, and say, and please share out over the next 3 months. And so that person can be redeployed to do something else, and they're not just doing this like toilsome job of like, let me read a bunch of screens here and cut and paste it into a spreadsheet here, then turn it into a presentation. All those things now can just be automated away, and it's much higher fidelity because if the customer asked me every week, it would be a different roadmap and it would be more up to date. And so things like that are actually very easy now with when the tools are connected and the data is connected, what you have to do.
Yeah. Okay, I love that example. When I get back to the office on Monday, I have 2 people who just generate custom roadmaps.
Yes.
So I'm gonna adopt that in my team. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the projects that you have inside Shopify. So there was a couple of projects you'd mentioned to me. So let's start maybe with River. Yeah. It's one of your internal agentic systems. Can you talk a little bit about what River does?
Yeah, so River is basically this idea of it has access to all of our internal systems, so it can read Slack, it can read G Suite, it can read GitHub, it can read our product management systems, it can read our customer support systems. And what it does, it's a way for you to kind of, as a quick stop, just ask questions. Now, the thing we've made clear with River is it's only allowed to work in public channels. And so what's cool is everybody in the company now has a River channel. So I have a channel called Farhan River. Anybody can go into it and see the questions I'm asking. A good example is actually while I was sitting here, I got a text from a friend who said, hey, my friend is on Shopify, and he had like an accounting question to deal with whether the GAAP accounting rules of his business in his region are actually correct, because actually he wants to know whether we charge the credit card based on fulfillment or order. Like, when do we charge the credit card? Is it when somebody hits checkout or when it's filled and shipped? And so instead of like, in the past, I'd be like, let me think about that. What region are they in? Let me look it up. I literally took the text and went to River, and I could have, of course, I think done the screenshot, but I took the actual text and I said, hey, River, I got this text. Is this true? What's the answer? And then River goes and looks at our internal systems and comes back and then gave me an answer. And I could actually say, can you give me a reply to the text? Right? So what it did was it kind of went through. Now, of course, I have to worry about hallucinations and make sure it actually still makes sense. But there's two things that are interesting. One, it's doing this analysis and allowing me to kind of search the internal systems to give me an answer. But two, I think this is also important. I can see the types of questions other leaders in the company are asking about our systems and what types of things are coming in. And so, I saw our head of retail ask a question about the point of sale, and I was like, wow, that's an interesting question about like currency. And so we see these people in different channels, and we're all joining each other's River channels to see these questions that we're asking. And then you can have it answer it in the format that you want. But I'll tell you a funny example. People, I'm sure this happens to you guys, people tweet out bugs. Mm-hmm. And so I can just take the tweet, go to River and say, is this a real bug? And then if it says yes, I can say, can you generate a PR to fix the bug? And it will write the code. And then, of course, we can talk about this. We still have a human review the code, but it's now taking this thing that used to be like, oh, it's a tweet, and like, what do I do? Do I prioritize? I can just say, oh, is it a bug? Yes. Okay, can you generate the code? And then someone can merge it, and now we fix the bug based on a tweet without kind of having any of the steps in between, which are like road mapping, find an engineer to write the code, like all of those things go away.
That's awesome. I'd love to see Thomas Kurian's questions and have that internally at Google. Very fascinating. Actually, that idea of being able to see other leaders, what questions they're asking, it generates a shared intelligence that everybody benefits from.
Well, because don't forget, it's public. So each time a question is answered and there's refinement, that goes back into River. Right. So if somebody goes to River, so this happens sometimes, River is wrong, right? So it says, oh, this is whatever, and someone will jump in and go, actually, River, you're wrong, you're missing this data set. But now, because it's in public channel, every future question is now updated with that new information. So you're not in a place where you're like 5 people have the outdated answer. Once one person has the answer, everybody in the next time will get the true answer, the new answer.
Awesome. So maybe, can you talk a little bit about how you had to change, adjust, adapt your data architecture to build an agentic system like that?
Yeah, so one thing that's interesting is, well, there's kind of 2 ways to do this. One is you do migrations. We have data here, we want it to be here, right? I mean, one thing that's good about Shopify is, one, we've standardized on BigQuery, and so we have a lot of our data analytics in BigQuery. But we have data all over the place also. Like we have MySQL databases, we have Yugabyte, we have Spanner. And so the first step of that was actually putting in MCP servers in front of these systems such that these first AI tools and now agents can access them. So there was an MCP for GitHub, an MCP for Slack, MCP for G Suite, right? Over time, those MCPs have changed into skills, right? And so now you have these skills that allow you to be like, oh, I have a skill, I now know how to search Slack, or I now know how to search the calendar. But these agents can use those things, and instead of having to migrate, like again, I said I have BigQuery, I have MySQL, I have Yugabyte, I have Spanner. I don't have to migrate them all to one system anymore. Now, maybe I want to for separate reasons because of consolidation of cost or for operational concerns, but I don't have to for agents. If I have a skill or MCP in front of those, I can ask River or any of the agents we use to answer a question, and it will go and look at those sources to find the answer. If I say something like, hey, tell me about this account, it will know over time to look at my email, Salesforce, Slack, to tell me all the product roadmap about that account. And it doesn't, so you don't have to consolidate anymore.
Amazing. Awesome. So let's maybe talk about the other agentic system. You spoke about Shopify's Pulse feature. Tell me a little bit about Pulse and how that's helping your customers.
Yeah, so one, again, interesting thing about the old model was in LLMs, you ask it a question, it comes back to you, and it's very like in the moment. one thing that's cool about like whether it's OpenClaw or agentic systems is you can have these like heartbeats, right? And if you're used to like Unix, like these cron jobs, right, that run in the background. Pulse is this idea that every day we can look at your, and so Shopify is a way to have more entrepreneurs. We have online storefronts and point of sale. And if you're a merchant on Shopify, the Pulse will actually automatically look at your store in the background and suggest things that you might be missing to improve your business. So in the background, it might message you and say, hey, did you know that your photos are low resolution? We know that from our data, high resolution photos enhance conversion. Or did you know that this best-selling product of yours over the last 6 months, you've been running out of inventory and no one can buy it anymore? So it's this idea of having like it's higher latency because it happens like once a day or something, but it actually can get insights from the system of Shopify because we know what works and what doesn't work. And we can give you those insights to be like, hey, by the way, you've added this element to your theme. It's slowing down your website. That might hurt conversion, something that you might not think about. So you don't even have to kind of ask it. It comes and tells you. Right? It's kind of like my Claw. I think I told you this story, right? My Claw messaged me the other day and said, how's your trip going? And I was like, how the hell did you know I'm on a trip? Right? Because but it knew from like my calendar and the flight schedule that I'm on a trip. And so it kind of proactively like asked me this question. In Shopify Pulse, we can say, hey, there's something that you may not be optimizing. Let us help you optimize your business.
Very cool. And do you see a time where you actually move to autonomous, where there's no more human in the loop and actually it maybe optimizes the storefront for you? Are your customers receptive to that?
Yeah, it depends, right? Because there's still this notion of taste, right? So you can have, and I think, we saw a demo, I think it was your demo, right? Where you changed the slide title because like, actually I like reimagined better. I think taste is going to still be paramount here. What should I build? What should I focus on? What suggestions can I take from you, but what can I do it myself? Right? This happens a lot with AI writing, for example. I'll have an AI answer, but then I modify it to make it sound like me. So I think the same thing's going to happen with agents, because they're going to come back and say, do you want me to do the following thing? You're like, yes, but change this to this, or don't invite that person, or please invite this person, or make it red, or make it darker. So I think that maybe for a while, we will still be in this loop situation, but I think over time it'll get better. There's like internal manager tools at Shopify that are agentic, and what I've realized is I will go through my workflow, read certain emails and respond to things and respond to messages in Slack, and then I'll look at what the manager tool said I should do, and I noticed more and more it's hitting the same things that I would do, and so at some point I'm going to switch and go to the manager tool and say, okay, let me just reply to these emails and these Slack messages because the manager tool is as good as I am at figuring out what the priorities are.
Awesome. So just thinking about kind of agents and that interface for your customers, I spoke a little bit about the fact that UIs it's less about UIs today. And in the SaaS space, everybody's been talking about how is SaaS being disrupted. It's actually the UI potentially being disrupted.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about how you're thinking about that internally?
Yeah, so a few things. One is, like, I talk to my Claw over iMessage, right? There's no UI for my Claw. At Shopify, we have Sidekick, which is like a chat on the side, and that's like text-based, right? So it does show you the workflow inside of the Shopify admin, but you're primarily talking through the chat interface. When we talk about buyer experiences, right? Obviously, we are online e-commerce and offline e-commerce as well, and we are monitoring where buyers are going. And if you go into Gemini and say, hey, what's a great gift for my daughter for her grade 8 graduation? And then Gemini shows you products, and then Gemini shows you a flow to either go to that website or potentially just check out right in Flow. That's a good change for the buyer, because now they don't have to kind of go through all these different brand sites, but a change for us as the merchant of record to help them figure out how to complete that transaction. And so we're seeing like lots of innovation happening there. It'll be interesting to see what the modality changes for the buyer, because buyers, I haven't been to a mall in a long time, but I went to the mall the other day, and like malls are still pretty thrive. Like it's a place where people want to go shopping and they want to have an experience and they want to viscerally touch fabric and things like that. So what is that in the new world? Do I want to still go to the merchant's websites from Gemini, or do I want to actually just check out right there? So we're still talking about these things and watching buyer behavior, but the idea is for us to kind of build the infrastructure so that wherever the buyer goes, or however the merchant wants to talk to us, we have the infrastructure to enable it.
Great. So as you're leading in this space, some of the use cases that you've just mentioned here, at the forefront of what I see some of our customers doing, what do you see as the big bottlenecks?
Yeah, one is trusting the AI, right? So an example is, you said humans are in the loop for now. We also have lots of humans in the loop because we don't fully trust the agent, right? It is not, even in engineering, it's not as good as a compiler yet, right? I was writing lots and lots of code in the 90s, and in the 90s, I remember working in a school project where the C compiler didn't actually produce the assembly I wanted. I had to go and hand modify the assembly code. So back then, the compiler wasn't even as reliable as it is today. So these non-deterministic systems are not at a place yet where I would just let them go on their own. One of the funny lines when people ask me, like, why do you run your OpenClaw on a Mac Mini versus in the cloud, is because I can unplug it. Because sometimes it can go nuts. I was in a meeting the other day and it started like messaging me over and over and it went into some crazy loop and I literally went over and unplugged my claw. So like, there are things that can go awry. And I think human in the loop right now for reliability is part of it, but I still believe that there's some taste aspect. But I think even over time, it'll learn your taste. So I would say you still have to really, the bottleneck is gonna be the humans that are in the loop. The claw can do much more, your agents can do much more, and you have to figure out where you're adding value to that loop and where you're not.
Awesome. Very interesting that you can unplug it.
You can unplug my claw, yeah.
It's a key core requirement for you.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about ROI. So as we move from actually systems that have been insights and we've taken action on them and we've measured ROI, in this new world of agents where maybe agents are just preventing things from going wrong, how are you internally thinking about the ROI measurement and partly putting together those business cases for trying new things?
Yeah, I mean, one interesting thing about Shopify is we've always built infrastructure. Meaning, if I could build a feature in 2 or 3 weeks, or I could build the infrastructure to enable that feature, and it would take 2 or 3 months, but then I could build the feature in 1 hour, I will always build the infrastructure. I will always make sure that I'm building the things a few layers deeper, such that anyone, us or a partner, could go and say, wow, the APIs are here, I can build that feature in 1 hour. So the same thing's true here in that we always try to build infrastructure. We're not sure like what the ROI case is because I don't know what amazing use cases can be enabled, because when that 1 hour feature is built, guess what? 10, 50 other things are built on top. So we've always been in the case of let's overinvest on infrastructure. Let's enable things for our first party, which is our own developers and our external developers. And we believe that by building it the right way, whether it's for an AI era, an agentic era, just for even infrastructure perspective, that will pay off in the long run. But we don't try to measure like short-term ROI in the way that you're saying. We mostly just think about what's the infrastructure that should exist for commerce. How do we make sure that anything can be built on top of it? And then we worry about the long term later. It's almost like if you build it, they will those things will come.
Amazing. For my last question, Farhan, what's the one thing that you're looking forward to in 2026? What innovation, exciting advancement do you see coming?
Yeah, well, I'm excited about LLMs are still changing, so I'm excited about the next set of models. I think the agentic harness was underappreciated in 2025, and it was like a buzzword that some people used, and now I think more and more people are getting on top of it. I'm interested to see like how far we can push the personalized agent, whether it's for managers at work, whether it's for a personal, like I mentioned, I have a claw that's calling a restaurant reservation every Friday to set up a dinner for my wife and I. So I think that can remove a lot of toil, and then I want to see what else people spend their time on, right? Like one of the things that's exciting for me is I'm an engineering leader and I haven't spent as much time coding as I'd like to, and now because I've got these tools, I code much more, and especially on weekends when I can pair with like an agent. And so I think that just the ability to kind of build your own software again, and I think everybody can be a builder again. That's the thing I'm excited to see, what people build this year.
And I was super excited to hear that from your CEO to your leadership, you're all hands-on coding.
Yeah. I mean, my CEO never stopped coding, but we now everyone's coding, and there's no excuses. If you've got 10 minutes, you can spin up CLI or spin up anti-gravity or something and just write something and build something for yourself.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Farhan.
Cool, thanks.
I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you. Thank you.